I will be graduating in May with a degree in anthropology, and I'm involved in a student organization up there called SAFE, Students Allied for Freedom and Equality. SAFE historically has been a Palestine solidarity organization. Started out, I'm not sure exactly on the history, but it's either right before September 11th, 2001 or right after. I'm not completely sure, but point being, SAFE came out as a result of Arab students on campus feeling like they wanted some sort of outlet for their pro-Palestine activism. We had other organizations on campus at the time, including a chapter of the ADC, American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, as well as cultural organizations like the Arab Student Association and the Lebanese Student Association. But SAFE was made with a very specific goal in mind. If you are an Arab interested in being active politically for Palestine, this would be the organization. So that's from my perspective as an Arab, this is how I think about it. But the organization itself wasn't explicitly an Arab organization. Many of the people who founded the organization were not Arab, and most of its members actually throughout the years have not been Arab. It's been a good mixture until recently, which I'll talk about. So as you can see here, the mission explicitly talks about the organization being committed to promoting social justice, human rights, liberation, equality, and self-determination for the Palestinian people as a fundamental principle for moving on in the Israeli-Palestinian impasse. And the guiding principles indicate the same thing. I know the writing's a little bit small, but very particular, about the happenings in Israel-Palestine and the things that we're committed to doing. So from 2001 until about 2008, 2009, most of SAFE's events were around Israel-Palestine, and specifically, especially towards the beginning around divestment. So trying to get the university to divest from companies that profit off of the occupation of Palestine and the Palestinian people. There was a big event in 2002. It was a divestment conference that was held there, and this was in 2002. It was prior to the 2005 call for BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanction, on behalf of Palestinian civil society against the state of Israel as a tactic for achieving equality and liberation for the Palestinian people. So the history of activism in the organization is very rich, and a lot of the same events around divestment continued to happen when I got on campus, which was in 2008. So I became a member of SAFE in 2008. At the time, I was probably one of 3 Arabs in the organization. The organization had probably 30 members. And it was particularly interesting to me because I got there thinking, oh, this is where I'm going to find the Arabs. But what I noticed is that most of our Arab students were either involved in religious organizations like the Muslim Student Association or cultural organizations like Arab Student Association, and all of its subsidiaries, not necessarily subsidiaries, but partners. And those organizations were explicitly non-political. So I felt it natural for me to get involved in this because it was Palestine was something that I really cared about, and so I immediately became involved. And these are the kinds of events that we hold normally, right? This is sort of reminiscent of the separation barrier that currently exists in Palestine. We're trying to create that same image and saying, ask us about Palestine. And, it's an event that people participate in, right on the middle of campus in order for us to try to promote awareness about Palestine. So all of this is to say, first I'd like to say that I don't want to make it seem like this is the experience of everybody in our organization. This is very much a narrow experience, and that's my own. But from my own experience, I noticed that 2008, 2009 we were doing a lot about Palestine, but we also noticed on campus a big influx of Arab students. I can speak personally. In 2008, we had 7 students from Fordson High School go up to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor In 2009, it was 27 students that went up, and as a result of a lot of different factors. There were more students from this area in particular, but also from other Arab communities in the area. So you notice this influx of Arab students, and many of whom are interested in being involved politically, and they weren't able to express themselves politically in these cultural organizations. So we ended up having a lot of Arabs in SAFE. Now this gets me into the conversation about the Arab Spring. That's what we're here to talk about. And even in our conversations when we were talking the last couple of weeks about our activism with the Arab Spring, how I remembered it, I guess I discovered as I was preparing for this presentation, has been shaped by the dominant narrative that we've come to believe as people who've observed the Arab Spring, right? So you think about the Arab Spring, Arab awakening, before it, we didn't really care about what was happening in the Arab world. After, all of a sudden, we were so engaged, and that, that's a dominant narrative, right? And that's how I began to think about what we had done as activists in SAFE. I began thinking, all of the events that we had that had to do with, areas in the Arab world other than Palestine were after January 25th, and before that, we had explicitly focused on Palestine, which I knew wasn't completely the case, but I was completely surprised to see how much Arab world activism we had done, prior to the January 25th, or prior to Tunisia in December of the previous year. So that was interesting for me to challenge the narrative that I had come up with in my head, or I guess had come to believe as a result of being a reading member of society, reached mainstream media and things like that. What ended up happening as a result of the influx of Arabs into SAFE is that we became really involved in events happening in the Arab world, even before the Arab Spring. So in December of 2010, we had an event called Remember Iraq, and this was Remember Iraq happened right around WikiLeaks, right? So WikiLeaks became big; it hit the news. That the U.S. had an official tally, their official tally of how many civilians had died in Iraq. So we went around and we had these, tags on our chests. Remember Iraq. We had the map of Iraq on there that had like pinpointed the locations of every place that the U.S. government knew someone like a civilian was killed, and we had it on our chests, and we walked around all day like that, and we had a really successful event on the Diag, which is the center of campus. So we were thinking about other areas in the Arab world other than Palestine before the Arab Spring, and then the Arab Spring happened, and I found that part of how we began to think about the Arab Spring and think about how we can be related to it was informed by our Palestine activism. So this is actually a couple of pictures from one of the first protests we had. This was January 28th, so just a few days after the big events started happening in Egypt. And we have Viva la Revolution, and we have Fund Democracy, Not Oppression. Stop $1.3 billion to the Mubarak regime, right? So this was something that was natural to us. This is how we expressed ourselves in terms of our activism. A lot of how we did our pro-Palestine activism was we said, hey, we need to be organizing to get the United States government to stop funding, the Israeli military occupation of, Palestine. So it was only natural for us to make a sign like this. It says, hey, we need to get the United States government to stop funding, Mubarak. It was very clear to us, and we had a very awesome group of people that was experiencing it together, and it was able to, pinpoint these sources of oppression and say, okay, how can we work to bring awareness or work to directly address. So a lot of events started happening all of a sudden that were more related to the Arab world than Palestine, and it definitely wasn't all of a sudden. It was a very organic process. I feel that felt natural to us, and that we didn't really question at first. So this was one of the events that we had. It was Shot Down, Dying for Democracy. And you notice here we have all of the, the hot countries at the time. Syria isn't listed here yet because nobody really anticipated things to flare up in Syria at that time. Nobody anticipated the revolution or the peaceful protests that would come soon after. And I'll talk a little bit about Syria in a little bit. But this right here is an example of the event that is referenced here. We had people literally lay down on the ground for a full 10-minute span as classes were changing, and it was a really powerful experience for the people who were laying down, but also for the people who were passing by, to see bodies laying down that were holding signs like "We are the revolution" and that I was sniped down for wanting democracy, or University of Michigan supports justice, because it really it kind of blurred the lines between here and there. Not completely. We all understood that we weren't really being sniped down, and we weren't really the ones experiencing that. But we very much felt like there was here, and we are in this just as much as they are. So when things started happening, this was like our anthem. Like we had it playing in the background all the time. This Egyptian guy walking around his Cairo and saying, "Oh, in every street in my country, freedom is ringing." So none of us had, most of us had never been to Egypt, had no prior connection to the country, other than maybe a few of our friends were from there or something like that. But we really felt that this was our struggle too. This was something that we were experiencing and that was very important to us.